Great job, readers. Good job. Let's give them a hand, shall we? Yep. That's awesome. We're going to talk a little bit about the offal, oral, whatever it was, okay? We're going to talk about that today. And it's a very important part, really, of all that we have to talk about. It's really crazy, too. So if you came to church today and you want your stereotypical sermon, you came on the wrong Sunday, because today is going to blow the categories, okay? It's times like these that you realize why people don't like to do biblical book preaching, because you can skip the hard parts. But when you do biblical book preaching, you can't skip the hard parts. We're in a series called Your Verse. It's a series on the book of Malachi. Hope your small groups are going well, and you're engaging in discussion at the relational small group level on some of the concepts in this book. And if you're here, and maybe you're just kind of getting in on the last part, or maybe just you haven't got in on the first part, you're just kind of getting in on the middle part of this thing, just know that the messages and things are online. You can watch a video or listen to the audio of those. If you're here every Sunday but you tend to sleep when I speak and everything, that's okay. Just go back. You can go back and fill it in and listen. And maybe you heard something that, like, I kind of like what he said there, or maybe I didn't like what he said there. I want to listen again. So this gives you an opportunity to jump out there on the web and kind of check that out. Okay? And it's really important to kind of go back and look at everything if you've missed some Sundays, because last week's message especially is important, because you'll really come away with some wrong impressions of God and what He thinks and how He works in the world. If sometimes when you read these Old Testament prophets and things, and you're kind of coming in and halfway into the movie, while it's already half of the movie shown, you're kind of coming in late and you're trying to figure out what in the world is going on. So it's good if you can go back and fill in some of those messages, and also to help round out your ideas of what God's up to. So it's a series called Your Verse, and you and I have a contribution to make in the great poetry of life. Question is, what kind of verse are we going to contribute? You can contribute a great verse in life, and some of you have done a great job already in a lot of ways. There's a guy that we quote on the front of the bulletin today, and it's Malachi is a composer, and he says, "Hell begins on the day when God grants us a clear vision of all that we might have achieved, of all the gifts we wasted, of all that we might have done that we did not do." And he's right. And I think that if we look at that quote in light of what we had to talk about today, we'll begin to get some insight into exactly what's being presented to us. And that is that we have this incredible potential, each of us, and we write verses and we think we like the verses, and maybe there's some great verses that we write. But is it all that we were meant to write? And if the facts were known, did we achieve the potential that really we had to achieve? And so we look at the nation of Israel, and those of you who have been here, you know that this is a post-exilic community, and what that means is the people we're talking about, okay, just kind of fill in real quick, the people we're talking about, their whole nation went into captivity in 586 BC. About 50 to 70 years later, they got to return home to the land of Israel. And these people are trying to figure out how to reestablish a national identity so as to continue as a group. Because if they are obliterated, and if their national identity markers and things are not preserved, that's why Malachi talks a lot about the temple. It was one of the chief ways of remaining a people of God, right? He talks a lot about breaking covenant in his book and things. And so he's trying to convey to the people, this is what has to happen if we're going to be preserved as a people, if we're going to survive the post-exilic world. It's been about 100 years since they've returned when Malachi writes his book. Okay? So for 100 years, they've kind of watched this thing evolve. God isn't showing up yet like we thought He might. And so they're copying an attitude toward God because He's not living up to their expectations. And in fact, the way Malachi presents this, it's a lover's quarrel with God. And you and I, the reader, get to listen in through the apartment wall at this major conflict, this major lover's quarrel that unfolds in this book of 4 chapters. Okay? And there's a lot of questions in this book. And there's some heated exchanges in this book. And God takes on this the issues of His love. And God's like, I loved you. And they're like, no, you haven't. How have you loved us? And God begins to get not hysterical, but historical with them. And He shows them how His love has preserved them as a people. And He's going to continue to preserve them. But the fact is, God's got an issue. He loves them, but He's not enjoying them because their attitude is smelly. And because they're disappointed, and they're taking that out in how they're honoring the name of the Lord. Does that sound familiar? Can I preach right here? Huh? Can I preach right there? I think I can. And that is that when we cop attitudes toward God, we cop attitudes toward others. God's not fulfilling His expectations I have for Him. Other people aren't fulfilling their expectations I have for them. It plays out in marriage. It plays out in relationships and jobs. It plays out in every area of life. Okay? If we think God's holding out or He's disappointed, He's not living up to His end of the deal or the bargain, we're going to show God that we disapprove. And it may not be that we're real belligerent with that. It may not be that we're just revolting toward God. We're going to assert crazy things like, God has abandoned us and He doesn't exist or something like that, just as a way of getting back at Him. No, we might still go to church. We might still do acts of worship, but we're just going to cut the corners. Right? That's what they were doing. It's our little way of going through the motion to keep God off my back, to look like we're doing everything we should be doing, but there's this rotten attitude that has an edge to everything. We'll sacrifice blemished animals if we have to. All right? Whatever it takes, we'll just do it our way. And this will be our way of kind of jabbing at God a little bit, right? Hey, I can preach right there. Okay? Everybody deals with that. We got to move on. Okay? So you got a group of people trying to figure out how to keep going as a nation. And by the way, these are good, legitimate questions. I went to see America this week. By Dinesh D'Souza. You don't want to miss that. If you have the opportunity, go see it. It's well worth your time. Especially in light of a very liberal agenda to try to shame America into compliance, so thus there's more control and power exerted, right? You know this. And so go take your time and go see that, because it helps you see the critical identity points of our nation and where it's headed. So, but when we look at this biblical situation, the backstory of it, we see that since they have no king now, they're in a post-exilic state. There is no king in Israel. There's only priests who fulfill the national leadership role. The king of Persia, is going to allow them to have governors and puppet leaders and puppet governors of the Persian Empire that's going to rule and reign in the land. They're discouraged about that, right? And so what they do is, in the absence of monarchy, they turn to the priesthood and they say, you guys lead us now. You show us how to get through this exilic state where 100 years God's not really showing up in our stuff, and we're discouraged. And does God still have covenant with us? And does He still have a plan? Are things still going to move in a direction historically, and things that they need to move? Is God still sovereign? And of course, we see the sovereignty of God emphasized in post-exilic writers. Okay, they understand there's something bigger than the states that are over us. But if we're going to survive, you're going to have to help us through this, God. And I'm not so sure even that that's their attitude. They're kind of looking to their priest and saying, you guys lead us through this. And the priests were like, okay. And then they began to lead in ways that weren't very good. All right? Yes. And they were very upset. Very, very upset like that. Right there. Thank you. They were. And so the people said, and now... Malachi the prophet says, and now you priests, that is you leaders, slide number 2. You leaders, this warning is for you. All right? So last week we talked about the sacrifices a little bit, and how that God, in other words, if mankind is bent on worshiping God a certain way, God says, okay, I want you to do it this way and this way only, because this is going to set you apart. And like a great missionary, God begins to work with cultures of the world right where they're at, and He leverages them toward Jesus eventually, right? And then there's no sacrifices offered after 70 AD when the temple was destroyed by the Romans. So what's God up to here? What's going on in our text when it talks about sacrifices and priests? Well, it's still a way. In this point in time, it's still a way in which God has chosen to work and reveal Himself. And of course, His indwelling presence, the special indwelling presence, or the dwelling Shekinah glory of God, has departed at this point. Ezekiel talks about that. I'll say more about that. They had this wonderful presence of God that was heavy atmosphere in the temple, in the Solomonic temple. When that was destroyed, Ezekiel pictures it in Ezekiel 11. The Spirit of God leaves, and it comes out of the Holy of Holies and into the inner court, and then out of the eastern gate and up the Mount of Olives, and it departs that way. And then later in Ezekiel's prophecy, in Ezekiel 43, he pictures the Spirit of God coming back and re-indwelling a millennial temple. Okay? But their issue is, how in the world are we going to make it without that special dwelling presence of God, that Shekinah glory of God? Heaviness of the glory of God. How are we going to make it as a nation? Priests lead us. They begin to lead. They call on the priest to lead them. But the priest failed them in so many ways as leaders in this post-exilic community. And you know, if you study the priesthood, you understand something, that the priesthood in the post-exilic frame of reference, very important to note that. In the post-exilic frame of reference, after the people get back, they're establishing their identity as a nation, the priesthood became a very prestigious position to have. They administrated the sacrifices. We all understand that. They were the nation's educators. They collected many of the Psalms and compiled them. They gathered the Proverbs. They preserved the prophetic writings. They reminded the people of their history. They were the national and spiritual leaders, and they were being called upon by Malachi the prophet to lead the people. And God is like, I want you to lead my people. I love my people, and I'm really concerned that my people are going to go down the same path that they went down pre-exile, and this thing is not going to go in the good direction. Okay? And so the post-exilic community was trying to figure out how they could survive without being this huge superpower. How can we make it? Thus the priests are going to lead us through this. But there's a problem. Their hearts were so far removed from God themselves. And verse 2 says something very important. If, and it's a conditional statement here, if you do not listen, the question is, can they still listen? Can they change? Yes, they can turn it around. They can write a better verse. Okay? But if you do not listen, and if you do not resolve to honor my name, you leaders especially, all of you, but especially you leaders, if you're going to stay with an arrogant attitude, if pride is a perverted form of worship, then not listening is its chief sacrament. And that's exactly what they were doing. Instead of true worship offered to God as God has asked us to do, instead of honoring His name, they decide they're not going to listen to God. God's not fulfilled their expectations. And so, if you do not listen, and if you do not resolve to honor my name, says the Lord Almighty, I will send a curse on you, and I will curse your blessings. Okay, that's vocabulary taken right out of the Mosaic covenant in Deuteronomy 28. If Israel lived obedient lives to the Mosaic law, then there would be blessings, Moses says. If they disobeyed, there would be cursings or things to deal with. And I think that probably many times the curses are built into the sins we commit. And so, but the Old Testament writers, especially the prophets and things, they address this in a very powerful way, and they're quoting God, as it were, and they're saying, okay, this is what's going to happen. You live out your life in disobedience, every aspect of your life is going to know some trouble. And it's just like, it's not unlike any good parent would parent a child that way. If you go down this path, this is what's going to happen. If you go down this path, this is potentially what can happen. You choose. And God does it that way. He honors our free will and our free choice. But He's honoring it even in the life of the people that He loves. He's chosen especially to use in the world. And these priests, I mean, they are very influential because, you know, they pronounce blessings on people. They can pronounce people clean or unclean. It had social ramifications. All right, you go show up the priest. If your skin lesion isn't pronounced clean, it has social ramifications in the community. They're very powerful people. They're leaders. They're spiritual leaders, and they're even in a measure political leaders and Bible leaders and spiritual leaders in every way. These are the people God's calling upon to lead the nation back to its identity, its sense of true purpose. All right? And God's like, you know what? You guys are doing your job in such a way that you're not honoring my name, and I'm not going to allow it to go on like this. He gets real with them. And when it talks about honoring the name of the Lord, it's talking about respecting, esteeming, highly cherishing, deferring to, elevating, submitting to, obeying, following. That's what he's talking about. You guys, it's time to honor me. Can't you just see God, who's a jilted leader lover? He's loved his spouse so well, but she refuses to give him any respect at all, no matter how hard he works. Can't you just see God and how hurt he is after watching this thing go on, and now he's going to watch it he's watched it 100 years now. Hopefully the captivity periods would have taught them something, but no, they're not going to go the way of humility, the way of honoring God. They're going to disobey God yet again, and they're going to persist in this arrogant attitude toward God, this pride-filled attitude toward God. Okay? Well, when Malachi says, I think it's time for us to resolve to honor the Lord, and if we choose not to, there's going to be ramifications and consequences that play out in our life. And so it's like when you priests offer blessings over the people, they're going to be cursings. And in fact, this is going to play out in such a way, slide number 3, I will even rebuke your descendants. Okay? So even the priests that come after you are going to have trouble and problems. Now, what's going to come next is an eye-opener. Okay? And for all the people who say, well, don't ever, God never gets dramatic or passionate, and only Christians say nice things, and this is how it's going to go, and we're just nice people and we never offend anybody. Okay? All those people are just going to get blown out of the water with this next verse. All right? Listen what God says. Okay? Because of you, and then lovers quarrel, I will rebuke your descendants. Your family's going to be impacted. The height of arrogance is refusing to see how your decisions have impacted those closest to you. Don't ever forget it. The height of arrogance is refusing to see the decisions that you're making and their impact on those closest to you. Well, it's just my right. It's my life. I'll do what I want. It's a height of arrogance. You have no idea what lives you're plowing through, especially those closest to you, especially a partner, especially a marital partner. Israel was plowing through. God was hurt. God gets graphic. They're refusing to listen. God says, I will smear on your faces the dung or offal from some translations. Readers struggle with that. I will smear on your faces the dung from your festival sacrifices, and you will be carried off with it. Shall we stand? Right? Glad you came to Stones Hill today. I hope this edifying message will encourage your heart. Let's stand and be dismissed. All right? All right. Well, it's not going to work that way, is it? Okay? Listen. God, and it's like I got to read that again and make sure I just read that. Right? It says, Nelson, it says, I will smear on your faces the dung from your festival sacrifices. I will smear on, and it's like it says to God Almighty, holy cow, God is talking smack. He really is. I love this. God is talking smack. What's it mean? Well, when you talk smack, you say things, generally you can probably get smacked over. Imagine saying to your spouse, I am so upset that I'm going to take dung and smear it on your face at the next family get-together. Okay? And she's probably going to go, whop. All right? And you'll be on the couch for at least a few weeks over that statement. Okay? God is talking smack. And by the way, this is the manure makeover sermon. That's what we'll call this, okay? The manure makeover sermon. Go ahead and tweet it out, Facebook it, just for curiosity's sake, right? In fact, second thought, don't do that. That's going to create a lot of headaches. This is the manure makeover sermon. All right? And why do people not deal with things like this? Because they don't want the manure to hit the fan. That's exactly why. But we don't do that here at Stones Hill. We're faithful. We deal with the hard places, right? Well, what's going on? Well, I've kind of set this up for several weeks. But if you've got a spouse or a family member or someone in your life you love, and they will not listen. You've told them over and over, and it feels like for 100 years. I love you. I care for you. I want to see God's best in your life. But you can't keep doing this. You're going to not only mess up your life, but the life of your family and the best things in life that God wants to bring to you. Okay? And so when you say this over and over and over again, and God has been saying this stuff through the prophets over and over and over again, and they won't listen to Him, and it's as if God says, if I reach down and I pick up the feces or even some of the intestines of a diseased sacrificial animal that's been spilled out over the temple stone during the sacrificial process, if I pick that up and smear your face with it, are you going to hear me now? Okay? Haven't you done this as a parent? You try to say something to a kid, they're not, yeah, so it's going over the top, and finally you just say, okay, and you paint a picture, and they finally, what did he just say? You ever done that as a parent? That's what God's doing. He's going to get graphic. He's going to use language even in such a way that lover God is going to communicate to His beloved how horribly He feels about the paths they've chosen. And He's going to shock and awe His leaders into listening because they will not hear Him. And when we look at that a little more closely, because it's like I got to spend a little time with that because I don't know that people are going to comprehend. I really think what's happening in the Bible many times, there's a big word here, but it references the concept I'm going to tell you about. It's anthropomorphism, all right? Anthropomorphism. What is that? It's when a writer assigns human attributes to a non-human thing or another being that's not human so that we can comprehend how they think or feel. Okay? And the Bible uses anthropomorphic language for God the Father. God, the sovereign one. The Lord Almighty. Okay? He doesn't have a body. He's spirit, John 4. Alright? God doesn't have a body. He's everywhere. He can't be localized. Now, God the Son had a body. But God is bigger than a body. He doesn't have a body. And even though the Scriptures say anthropomorphically, they say that, for example, that when God smells the pleasing odor of a burnt offering like it does, like 40 different Old Testament references times, okay, in the Old Testament, God doesn't have nostrils to smell with. All right? But He does. It does picture in human language how wonderful it is when we come before God openly and honestly in humility. Okay? And God doesn't have hands to smear poo-poo with. God is a lover, and He's been insulted so many times, but and even though these lame sacrifices and these festivals who are really more for their benefit than His, He understands and He feels the emotion, the passion from that. And He's like, you know what, Israel? If you just take feces from those lame sacrifices and spread them on our marriage covenant and throw it in the trash, that's about how you're treating your relationship with me. In fact, these priests were so covered, they're so particular in how they look. This would have been so repulsive that they're in these elaborate vestiges, garments and things, ceremonial garments, and about the only thing you could see were their hands and their face. And to picture these pure garments with a face covered with sacrificial feces. Whoa! Did God wake them up? Did God wake them up out of their lethargy? Did God wake them up from their deaf ears? Did they stand up and listen when God made this statement? You bet they did. It's like, wow, God is talking smack. We never heard God talk smack. He's talking smack. We better listen, boys. And when you look at this idea of anthropomorphic language where God is referenced in ways that humans would understand, we see God walking in the Garden of Eden, closing the door of the ark, smelling the aroma, descending to have a closer look at the Tower of Babel. We see God described as having arms and hands and mouth and a voice and eyes and ears and a face. And God is portrayed as experiencing a wide range of human emotions in the Bible. He experiences emotions such as regret, anger, jealousy, loathing. Anthropomorphic expressions of God. We're humans. We have no way of comprehending a being this big. We can't figure Him out. He's beyond us. Now, can we know a lot more about Him because of Jesus, the high definition life of Jesus? Yes, we can. But God is so complex. He's so beyond us. We use terminology that we can understand as humans to try to describe these descriptors, to try to describe how great this being really is. And so when our text talks about smearing your feces with dung from your festivals, it's referring, again, to the entrails or the bodily waste that would litter the area when the animals had been sacrificed after a festival. And the leftovers from the sacrificial animals had to be taken from the temple precincts, and there was a garbage dump nearby. And they would take these things there, and the priest, it was a very highly ritualistic process. These pure priests, very clean, very careful about being pure before God to administer, the sacraments and things of sacrifices before the eternal, sovereign, holy God. All right, they would take these parts carefully out of the camp, out of the area, the temple precincts. They would burn these things. They would come back in, do their ritual washings and bathing and things. And that was a normal ritual to get rid of the unclean things. And so when God says, you know what, the way our relationship is going, it's like spreading the defiled waste on the priests' faces and carrying them away as so much waste themselves was God's way of saying, you stand to be removed from your office in utter disgrace. Your leadership, prestigious leadership position it's going to be taken away. Because you don't care about me really. Okay? And since they considered it such a burden to serve the Lord, Malachi 1:13, He would free them from their burden by removing them and even their descendants from His service. And God says, I see your heart. And Israel, it's so disgusting. You're not loving me. You're using me. You're not loving people. You're using people. And all the people see is your face and your hands. And you're this holy whatever. All right? And I'm so sick of this. God and His lovers quarrel. It gets to a climax in this conversation behind the apartment wall with these people. And God's like, I'm so sick of this. I'm going to take the contents of your heart. I'm going to take everything that's in your heart, as defiled and decadent as it is, and I'm going to spread it on your holy faces so everybody knows what's really inside. Did God get their attention? You bet He did. He gets their attention. God gets dramatic in this lover's quarrel. And He loves them and He cares for them so passionately. But He does what any lover would do or any parent would do. It's like, what do I need to say to get through to this person who's going to forfeit the very best things that life could have given them? God talks smack. Because He loves. He doesn't just abandon. He engages in conversation. And He paints for them a picture, albeit a very smelly one, to get the message through. God will do what He has to do to get you to listen, even if it means talking smack. You know, a relationship with God does not go well when we arrogantly ignore Him and disrespect Him. And that's exactly what we do. And especially, you know, I think about national applications, especially today with the movie America fresh on my mind. And that's like, I don't care how legal you make stuff. It can be, you can write all the laws you want to write, but it doesn't make it right. You're thwarting, you're dishonoring the holy God. And He holds us accountable. He gives us up. Many times He gives us up. The sins, the curses for the sins we commit are built into the sins we commit. It's just all built right into it. Life will fall apart when we choose to do a life that does not honor our Creator. I often tell the kids, you know what, guys? You go out and do anything you want to do. Go to Africa. Go to Alaska. Go to college. Go move away. It's all good. Whatever you do, you honor God with your life. Honor Him. Put Him first. Define everything by that relationship. Make sure that's right. We'll find cheap tickets on Southwest if we need to. You go where you need to go, but make sure God is the first in your life. You honor Him. And you write a good verse, because that's the bottom line for me. But I can tell you, you know, all of us that's been married and we've had relationships with other people and things, I think we probably can all recall moments when something got very dramatic and it got our attention in those relationships. If you just think about your marriage, right? Haven't you had moments, maybe in parking lots or at the mall, or maybe maybe this Sunday morning, maybe just a few minutes ago, you had a dramatic moment. And I'm not saying somebody said they're going to, you know, rub feces on your face if you don't get up and go to church. I'm not saying it was that bad. But you guys understand what I'm saying. You have dramatic moments. We all have these dramatic moments in relationships where we just can't take it anymore, and we've got to give voice to exactly how we feel and what's going on. Okay? And notice now, this is lovers' quarrel. Don't be going out and using this graphic stuff with people you hardly know. This is going to get you in trouble. Okay? You'll come to church next week and you'll be kind of black and blue and green like my shirt. And we'll wonder what happened to you. Oh, I got graphic, Pastor. I just decided I'd go out and talk some smack. Okay? You and your mama too. Watch this, you know. Okay? All right. All right, we're talking smack. Right? Okay. Be careful. But in a relationship like this, the way God's setting this up, okay, He's got people who will not listen. And He says, watch this, Malachi. I'll paint a picture that they cannot not hear. And when they heard God say this, they were all ears. Tell me more. Now this is getting serious. You know what? Boys, let's do away with the scratch and dent bin out there, shall we? I think God's got an issue here, and we better pay attention. Let's just do away with the scratch and dent models. Let's upgrade that a little bit, right? You know, maybe I ought to start, and you go through this maybe with a close spouse or something, a lover's quarrel. And you know, a lot of lovers just want their spouses to lead in ways that love them. And that's what God was wanting. Would you just lead my people and love my people? Yeah, they're messed up and they smell. I know that. You know, they got issues. But will you just love them and care for them? Priests, will you lead them? Be good leaders. Would you lead your wife? Would you lead in your family? Right? Well, when God will do what He has to do to get through to us, and I'm almost sure this morning that God has gotten dramatic in some of your lives. God maybe trying to talk a little smack to some of you just to get you to wake up. Okay? It's not past God to talk smack. And He'll do it because He loves you. And not only does a relationship with God not go well, when you ignore God and refuse to listen to God, because when you refuse to listen, it says you know everything. And God doesn't know what He's talking about, so I'm not going to listen to what God says. Okay? Well, marriage doesn't go very well either. when spouses are ignored and they're avoided and they're bypassed in lieu of other things, even spiritual things. Go to slide 15 if you would. I want to tell you the story of Kathy Keller, and we're going to have a very special closing here this morning. I'll just ask that person to get ready because I'm going to have you come up maybe 5 minutes or so. 8 minutes, I'll have you come up, and we're going to have someone that's attempting to write a better verse with their life. And they're going to help close things this morning with their personal story, okay? But Tim Keller, Kathy Keller, a great couple. He's a sensational speaker, actually, a great teacher. And they planted together a church, Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City. If you ever go to New York City, you want to go to that church. I've never been, but everybody says it's a great experience. I've been to New York City, but haven't been to the church. It's a great experience. They're reaching a city for Christ. It's just phenomenal what's happening. A lot of young single people looking for answers, biblical answers. They're looking for people to preach the Bible and really understand this book and understand how it works in the cultural setting of a city. And New York City at that. So he's doing a great job. And they went to New York City several years ago to plant Redeemer Presbyterian Church. And they knew it would be a time-consuming task. And Tim Keller's tendency was to overwork anyway. And so after 4 years of this church plant, sure enough, he was working all the time. And Kathy feared that he was neglecting his duties as a father and a husband. And they were having this ongoing lover's quarrel. And they were not free. He wasn't freeing up any time to pursue other things that were important in her life, especially her. And the relationship was suffering. And so she said on page 145 here in her book, she said, I had a godly tantrum. A godly tantrum. Quote unquote. Tim came home from work one day. It was a nice day, and he noticed that the door to the patio for their apartment patio area, the door was open, and he heard this smashing noise coming from the patio. And he's like, well, he's curious, so he walks out to see what's going on, and investigate, and he walks out and he sees his wife sitting on the patio, and she's got a stack of their wedding china and a hammer, and she's just nailing those plates and just shotting those things. She's sitting in these china shards, plate shards all around her. She's just really hammering it hard. And she explains in her book, she says, I had to do something dramatic to get his attention because Tim wouldn't listen to me. Forget writing letters and intimate conversations and emails and texts and all these other things. I wasn't getting through to this guy. He wasn't hearing me. And so she calls this her godly tantrum. And so she's breaking these plates. And Tim is like, I'm here. He sees what's going on. He understands it. I'm here. I'm here. I'm all ears. Okay? Okay? Just stop breaking the plates. Stop. You're breaking our china. Stop breaking the china. Well, he realizes in that moment, he says, that I thought maybe for a second she was having a breakdown. I thought that, she snapped. The city's gotten to her. My schedule and things gotten to her. But he said, as I listened to her tell me once again the issues that were on her heart, he said that she was intense. She was very clear and focused. And her rage, it was not a rage. She was very much in control during this whole dramatic process. She spoke calmly but forcefully. And her arguments were simply those that she had been offering to him for months. Yet he refused to hear it. Later, he asked Kathy, his china-smashing wife, would you have really broken all of our china if I hadn't agreed to listen? She said, oh no. She said, actually, the reason I broke the first few plates, we had lost the cups to the saucers over the years. So I was just making good use of those. Smart woman. Okay? What did she do? She got dramatic, and he finally heard her. Now listen, again, you got to use good judgment on this. But has God in your own life, and I want to ask you a question, Has God gotten dramatic in your life? Has He been trying to communicate with you for a long time about your life, the direction it's going? God and you in this lover's quarrel, trying to get something to resolved, trying to work through issues, your expectations of Him, His expectations of you, how your life has gone. Has God talked smack in your life? If He has, it's because He loves you. And He wants to bring you home to His lover's heart, a lover leader heart. Something else the Kellers say in their book that stands out. To be loved but not known is comforting but superficial. Right? To be loved but not really known is comforting but superficial. They really don't know you. They say they love you and so on. But to be known and not loved is our greatest fear. But to be fully known and truly loved is, well, they say, a lot like being loved by God. It is what we need more than anything else. It liberates us from pretense. It humbles us out of our self-righteousness and fortifies us for any difficulty that life can throw at us. And as we continue on in this lover's quarrel between God and His people, we have to be reminded that Malachi starts with this lover's quarrel. We're listening through the apartment wall. God and His people are having it out. He's loved. Israel doesn't see it that way. They cop an attitude. They start blaming God. Malachi addresses their attitudes that are so often dishonoring to God and to others. And then when Israel won't listen, God gets dramatic. He paints two pictures. He has one feces-covered face being hauled to the garbage dump in total humiliation. And the other picture, as we've seen and our readers have shared, don't have time to get into the details of that this morning, but just know that the other contrasting picture is a mighty messenger leader who loves and leads and speaks the truth and uses their influence for good. That's the contrast. What verse do you want to write this morning? What picture do you want to align with? Well, I've shown you the quote and read you the quote, but like Menotti, the composer, says, hell begins on the day when God grants us a clear vision of all that we might have achieved, of all the gifts we wasted, of all that we might have done that we did not do. The Levites and the priests were going to forfeit such a wonderful time in history when they could have helped this nation struggle back to her feet, get their identity again, get refocused on God again, make good choices. You know what? The Messiah may not come in our lifetimes, but by God's grace and our watch, we're going to keep a world ready and expectant for His coming. We're going to do temple right. We're going to maintain covenants. We're going to walk with God. We're going to honor our leaders. We're going to have good leaders. We're going to do our tasks the best we can do them while we can do them. That could have been their story. But Malachi sees something else, and he has to confront it. God's been hurt. God wants them to listen. They refuse to listen. God talks smack to save them from the heartache of the rubbish heap. Maybe today you feel like there's parts of your life that's kind of smelly. It's got the feces of the past. I hate to use the picture again, but it's so readily here in the text, and it's like, you know, my life's been full of crap. I need Jesus. It finally hit the fan, and God got dramatic, and I still said, no, I'm not going to listen. No, I'm not going to yield. No, I'm not going to walk this way. And for all of us crap-smelling people, there's a God who showed up in the world in a body form, and His name was Jesus, and He died for you and me because we're smelly people. And the Bible says if you'll place your trust in Him and turn your life over to Him and get off your arrogant high horse and listen to somebody beside yourself for once, He'll deliver you from the trouble. It may not be overnight. He'll work you out of your curses and your troubles and your heartaches, and He'll work you to new life. But get off your high horse. Lay it down. Give your life to the Lord. And that's what I encourage you to do this morning. There's a guy that's done that here. He's going to help us wrap up this morning. I so appreciate Jim Meal. Jim Meal, would you come up? He's going to share a dedication here to his wife and family, and this guy's wanting to write a better verse. And he's also going to co-lead the Family Project ministry in the fall, where all of you will be invited to the Family Project, and that'll be going down. The Irreplaceable movie, we're going to be showing that. He's going to help coordinate and lead that. And so, can we just give this guy a hand for standing up, writing a better verse? Yes. I'm going to go back and listen. Okay. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. 20 years ago, I knew this was going to happen. My wife and I, Crystal, got married on July 16th, 1994. We beat the odds. We were married at 18 and 19 years old, especially in this day in society. That's a pretty good feat. It all started with one song, The Dance by Garth Brooks. And, of course, we made that our song, and we decided to dedicate our lives and our marriage to it. Looking back, we couldn't have picked a better song. I wouldn't change anything that brought us together. I wouldn't change anything in the 20 years that we've been together. As the song conveys, if one decision, one event, one circumstance would have been changed, I would have missed out on all the good gifts and the greatest gifts that God has given me. Would I have made the decision to become a Christian if I hadn't met Crystal? Don't know. I don't want to find out. I would not have the privilege to be the father of 4 wonderful and talented children. I wouldn't have seen together. We wouldn't have seen the perfect way that God brought our family together in a way that we never expected. We wouldn't have, through the hard times, we wouldn't have become so strong and so close. And Crystal, we've got a lot of verses to write, and I'm honored and privileged that God has chosen me to lead our family through this dance that we call life. Crystal, Acacia, Sabiana, Jamesy, and Remington, this song is for us.
Take your spouse's hand for a moment and listen.
Looking back on the memory of the dance we shared beneath the stars above. For a moment, all the world was right. How could I have known that you'd ever say goodbye? And now I'm glad I didn't know the way it all would end, the way it all would go. Our lives are better left to chance. I could have missed the pain, but I'd have had to miss the dance. Holding you, I held everything. For a moment, wasn't I a king? But if I'd only known how the king would fall, hey, who's to say? You know, I might have changed it all. And now I'm glad I didn't know the way it all would end, the way it all would go. Our lives are better left to chance. I could have missed the pain, but I'd have had to dance. It's my life, it's better left to chance. I could have missed the pain, but I'd have had to miss the dance.
Thank you. And we only have a little time in this life, if you really think about it. Just a little blip on the big screen. You know, you hear me throw out numbers like 586 BC and 722 BC and 1495 and 70 AD, and it's like, wow, that's just like, I can't picture that. Well, you put your little life on the time spectrum. It's just a little dot, a little blip, done. 75 years, boop, done. Over. Don't waste it. Don't waste it on a horrible verse. You've got too much good to do. People to love. Blip, done. What was your little blip? Okay, what was your verse? Write a good one. Thank you, Jim. Let's sing together. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for the honesty of the Bible. And I appreciate the insight we get into your word. And I thank you for loving us so much. You're willing to talk smack and even stand to be misunderstood by a lot of people today. But I love it. You're so good. You're so loving. You pursue us so passionately. You will not sit and sulk in a corner. You will engage because you love. Thank you. I ask and pray that each of us would write better verses, wholesome verses. Life is so short. We're all just, the decades are clipping by. Crazy, crazy, crazy. And we're all going to be losing our teeth, and their hair's going to fall out, and we're going to be limping along, and we're going to wonder where life went someday. Well, praise God. We want to look back and say, wow, we did the best we could. Wrote the best verse we could possibly write. And that starts with loving you and honoring you, and that starts with loving the closest people to us in our life. Would you help us to do that today? God, we are so sorry for the times we've lived, and we've just been full of crap. Just full of it. Ourselves and our agendas and our ideas and our words and our positions. It's just full of it. But the beauty is that you'll love us back home to your Father heart. And that's what I see you doing here this morning. Would you help us this morning to let you dress us in your righteousness? Peter said we're a kingdom of priests. We're new in Jesus. We're covered in the righteousness of the blood of the Lamb. It's in Him we live and move and have our being this morning. So thank you for that. Guide us now. May we all engage in a better dance in your name. Amen. Thank you. Have a great day.